During what would become the space history, an apocalyptic explosion of near nuclear magnitude took effect at Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, 2 weeks before the Apollo 11 landing on the Moon. The Soviet N-1L5 megabooster launched on July 3, 1969, moments later. The rocket was the Soviet counterpart to the US Saturn V to enable crewed travel to the Moon and beyond. Fortunately, the most powerful ever built to that day ignited while the rocket crashed back. Quote, "Today I saw without exaggeration the end of the world, but while fully awake and standing right next to it." Lieutenant Colonel Semen Kamar, the massive explosion. The N-1 moon project was subsequently pushed back, cost millions in losses. But Soviet officials didn't measure the setbacks and turn the precious time they had wasted to win the moon race. On July 5th, only 2 weeks before the Eagle's landing, President Nixon received a presidential daily brief. Officials, quote, "Deployment of Soviet recovery ships indicated the rocket to the moon and bring back samples of lunar soil before the scheduled launch." The first indications of the Soviet attempt were the seismin in Baikonur, which the CIA coded as Teyuratom. They'd also be able to listen to countdowns and access telemetry data streams from Soviet missions. In the span of Nixon's presidency, 3 N-1 rocket launches in the United States seemed to take an unquestionable advantage over the Soviet Union in the space race. Nevertheless, technical and policy analyst Charles Vick suggests the race was far closer than publicly perceived, based on declassified intelligence. By then, U.S. intelligence officials did not know that the had actually been the second attempt to launch the N-1. The first one had been, and it went undetected. Kremlin watched closely as the Apollo 8 flew around the Moon, the Apollo 9 and the Apollo 10 set the stage for a lunar landing. The Soviet moon race, even before their first N-1 attempt, failed drastically when the 3L in February of 1969. The N-1 heavy lift launch vehicle, whose objective was to deliver payloads beyond low Earth orbit on the Moon. By June 3rd, 1 month before the second attempt, officials met in Podlipki, near Moscow. The Hen Bureau, Vasily Mishin, assured the attendees that they had learned their lessons from space and had protected the cord control system from interference. The N-1 for a new launch, and Mishin was confident it could be sent on a mission around the Moon. Furthermore, Mishin guaranteed that the next 6L mission would launch a full and return safely to Earth, and attributed any setbacks to delays. Mission's superiors did not believe he was being forthcoming about the mission. Boris Chertok, chief of flight control system development, submitted that although a 1969 deadline to manufacture and deliver all systems was realistic, would still be required. This board meeting even discussed under warning that any downgrades to the current task should be reported, realizing about manned missions to Mars. Still, he did not get any serials. The project's final schedule would be submitted to the Kremlin after Mr. Sergei Afanasyev. Meanwhile, Mishin was allowed to continue, provided that they didn't interfere with the ongoing 5L mission. The N-1 5L rocket would fly with only some of the first launch attempt. Further upgrades were put aside, along with the 4L. During a series of meetings held in Teyuratom, Boris Chertok that his flight control team would not be able to prevent the cord network from issuing random commands or fire to the 3L. Viktor Litvinov, head of the general, advised Chertok not to mention that detail in their state commission meeting the next day. Chertok complied and assured Litvinov that he would look into the matter. There was Vladimir Barman, the head of the launch infrastructure, in a program to guide the rocket into the desert in case of miscarriage. His abilities could be severely damaged if an incident were to be replicated on the launch pad. Besides, the addition of more reliable power generators and a re-evaluation of thermal insulation for reinforcements were needed. This was likely prompted by the results from the first. An acceleration of 35 G was recorded to press on the ring around the propulsion system, and all 30 engines reached full thrust. Overall, mission points were placed on the spacecraft, and the 5L would attempt a circumlunar flight. The State Commission finally met at the main assembly building in Site 112, and Vasily Mishin presented all the improvements made on the 5L. For July 3rd. To a rendezvous with the Moon, the 5L launch time was set at 11:18 p.m. at Moscow. Nighttime was chosen to simplify evacuation, as most workers would have already. 2 rockets were raised simultaneously on top of 2 consecutive launch 10. On the right pad, the N-1, and on the left, a mock-up version and integrated tests. It was a rare sighting at first, but the mock-up were launched for security reasons. Pre-launch preparation, though a heat wave affected the personnel. After completion of fueling, marked with red ribbons were removed from the vehicle. At the end of the workday, evacuated around the potential explosion radius. Hundreds of cars and trucks took to safety, along with anything considered of value. The second evaluation, when most personnel were relocated to Site 115, the closest safe spot. Special protective trenches were dug out for the occasion. Many people remained at close range to witness the launch, including locals, as others watched from their rooftops. Lifted off from the launch pad, A bright light illuminated the area up to the control center. An announcer reported, quote, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, flight normal. But suddenly many thrust indicating engines number 1 to 12 dropped to 0. Several pieces started to fail as it froze for a moment while at 100 meters from the ground. To have a functional emergency escape system, so when it began to tilt to the side, fired, conveying the top section to safety. Finally, it shut on the launch pad. Shocked eyewitnesses stared at the enormous red and black mush of the starry sky above. The area around Site 115 was vibrating, and the cheerful atmosphere at the Site 10 residential area suddenly The lights were turned, pad was in flames, and the evacuation process was efficient. Incredibly, only 15% of the rocket's propellant detonated, so at co-detonation only reached 4.5 to 5 tons. Still, powerful artificial non-nuclear explosions in history. The damage is believed to have cost about 350,000 rubles, but that might be an Later investigations speculated about the failure of engine number 8 of a second before liftoff. The cord system cut off all the other 30 engines, 18th, whose thrust accounted for the tilting of the entire rocket. This that captured high-frequency engine parameters being recovered at the site, coming to a definite achievable. The incident was finally attributed to a foreign particle. However simplistic, no further explanation could be validated. The Soviet bid in the race to send cosmonauts to the moon had failed, as it would in 1971 and 1972. The 4 consecutive cancellation of the entire N1 project, by decree of the Central Committee of the Communist Party. On November 23, 1972, Nixon daily brief that stated, quote, "The Soviets launched their largest space booster this morning, but it failed early in flight. It was expected to send an moon with recovery either in the Indian Ocean or in the Soviet Union. Problems with the booster. The Soviets' first attempt at a manned lunar landing is not expected in the 70s. In an era of incredible innovations, a Soviet engineer dreamed of bringing light to desolate regions of Russian vales. Vladimir Serebriakov Nitkov conceived the idea of creating a collider capable of reflecting solar light back to Earth. This feat would light agricultural productivity in Soviet regions where daylight was scarce during the winters. The light faced a lot of opposition from the government and the Soviet space program. Still public and got the required funds, his dream project was now a reality. Several space mirrors, each larger than the last, until one became permanent. Development, Zamia 2 was launched in October of 1992, and for a brief moment lit a small portion of the Earth. The ambitious Russian project seemed taken smoothly. Vladimir Serebriakov Nitkov was born in Russia on January 7, 1933. Age, he was fascinated with the world of engineering and technology. Young Vladimir Grimes, Joseph Stalin's regime was known for its violent tactics and iron fisting and continued military and political purges. Stalin's obsession with militarizing and making it the most efficient industrial and economic bloc in the world had a tremendous toll on it. Millions of workers were exploited, and Stalin went on to eliminate weekends to It was also a productive time for ambitious engineers and scientists, as the U.S. advantage in technological innovations during the arms and space races with the United States. And Vladimir eventually graduated from the Bauman Moscow High Technical University, Moscow State University, with a degree in engineering. In 1956, he was at the Korolev Rocket and Space Corporation Energia, who were tirelessly working on the design of the first piloted spacecraft in the history of mankind. After working in the engineering industry, Vladimir eventually became the department head of Energia in the late 19th. He helped design spacecraft, onboard manipulators, and docking systems, developed the Androgynous Peripheral Attach System, or APAS, which allowed 2 spacecraft to be or semi-permanently. This effective docking mechanism would be used in 19 Soviet and American space capsules that were part of the joint Apollo-Soyuz program, national space mission. An upgraded version would also be used in the 1990s with the Mir space station. It was during these years that Vladimir Serebriakov with the idea of solar sails. In 1988, it's proposed to commemorate the 500th anniversary of Christopher Columbus's arrival to America between the Moon and Earth. Although the U.S. soon discarded the project because of economic, the Soviet Union continued its development through the Space Regatta Consortium, or SRC. This partnership was formed by Energia, Vladimir Serebriakov Nitkov, and other Soviet intellectuals. Its objective was to test solar sail technology for future projects. On from space legal issues, solar sails were, quote, a method of spacecraft propulsion pressure exerted by sunlight on large mirrors. Vladimir's idea was a system that could use the sun's power to propel a spacecraft through space and reflect sunlight. Columbia University professor Jonathan Crary would later write in his book, the scheme called for a chain of many satellites to be placed in sun-synchronized orbit 1,900 kilometers, each one equipped with fold-out parabolic reflectors of paper-thin material. Once fully extended to 200 meters in diameter, each mirror satellite would have a 10-square-mile area on Earth, with a brightness nearly 100 times greater than moonlight. Although ingenious, the idea was not novel. German physicist Hermann Oberth had already developed the concept of a space reflector. This giant mirror all parts of the Earth to provide nighttime illumination. However, Oberth the mirror as a solar weapon. The intention was for the system to incinerate specific entire lakes and rivers. But the project was quickly forgotten during World War II. When Vladimir Serebriakov Nitkov first presented the idea to the Soviet space program, and the Soviet Union was not taken seriously. The proposal seemed too outlandish, and there were more. It was 1988, and the once powerful Soviet Union could not afford to waste more on projects that would not have a direct and immediate economic benefit. One such was a way to increase productivity in agricultural processes in northern regions, with long days, extremely short days during winters. To convince his comrades and attract national, he started marketing his solar sail project as a natural way to increase daylight extension and workers' productivity in farmlands. In an interview with the Moscow Times, "We are pioneers in the field. If the experiment goes according to plan, we will craft into space in the future on a permanent basis." The project attracted so much interest that the engineer had to adjust his initial plans. Instead of using the solar sails to power, he would now focus on developing the space mirror to light dark zones through the entire planet. Improving overall workers' productivity in northern Russia, Vladimir pointed out that the project costs in electric lighting and help rescue teams during natural disasters involving hurricanes. With all this newfound international attention, the Space Regatta Consortium was finally able to move ahead with the development of the space mirror. In describing the engineer, Jonathan Crary would write, quote, "But the company subsequently expanded its plans of supplying nighttime lighting for entire metropolitan areas. Reasoning that it could reduce lighting, the company's slogan pitched its services as daylight all night long." Later would tell the Moscow Times, quote, "No more electricity bills, no more long dark, serious breakthrough for technology." He named the future satellite the Zamia. Vladimir Serebriakov Nitkov and his team first developed the Zamia, or banner model. The first Zamia was never sent to space, but helped perfect the Zamia 65-foot wide space mirror. Vladimir's plans were to first launch the Zamia by the 82-foot Zamia 2.5, then the 230-foot Zamia 3 and 656-foot mirror installation. In 1993, New York Russians to test space mirror as giant nightlight for Earth detailed the space mirror plan. Initial operational systems, using reflectors 650 feet in diameter, would have twirls in northern inclination orbits, either 620 miles or 3,700 miles. A reflector could light a spot by itself, or several could be focused on the same area for continuous greater brightness, scientists say, producing the light of up to 50 full moons. Would pivot as they passed overhead to keep their light on the same spot, could illuminate surface areas 35 miles across. The Zamia 2 was launched aboard a Progress M15 Kenor Cosmodrome on October 27, 1992. After passing through, the Progress spacecraft deployed the mirror next to the space station and produced a 5-kilometer wide scene from southern France to western Russia. The bright spot traveled at an estimated second, and although its luminosity was equivalent with that of a full moon, it was only partially excessive cloud cover above Europe. The success of Zamia 2.5, which was expected to light up to 7 kilometers of land with a luminosity each, but its main objective was to keep the spotlight at a fixed position for several minutes. Nikolai N. Sebastianov, a ranking project engineer on Zamia, told the New York Times, "Reflector was a big success because it proved the concept was right. Now we must seek support it." Zamia 2.5 was launched on February 5, 1999. The sail was unfurled, the mirror caught on an antenna from the space station and ripped. Freed the space mirror, but the Zamia deorbited and burned up. Zamia 3, but the project was abandoned. The government decided that spending on it was pointless. There was also extreme opposition from environmentalists and scientists. Mirrors would have detrimental physiological consequences for animals and humans. Engineers still hoped to one day be able to light up 6 Russian cities with a space mirror, on the project until he passed away in 2006. Vladimir's mission not only earned the respect of Russian space engineers, but also of Americans with whom he worked, and since the Russian word for cheese is sir, Serebriakov as the big cheese. In July of 1974, the U.S. first and only cannon to be shot into space. Haunted by fear of inspecting or attacking Soviet spaceships and satellites, the R-20 23mm cannon had been secretly installed in the Salyut 3, as was a top-secret military space station program, camouflaged in its exploration. Fully armed and operational, the space was the world's most closely guarded secrets until the fall of the Soviet Union. To set off the military space race under a clandestine program intended to secretly establish hidden behind the more public missions of the wider space race. Classified, with Vice Admiral Richard Truly telling James Bamford from Business Insider, "You just couldn't tell anybody about it. Nobody." Projections and logistics for the program, named MOL, or Manned Orbit, were carried out with the American intelligence community with support from the Air Force and NASA Reconnaissance Office from 1963 to 1969. The forces were tasked with the goal of spying on and opposing the USSR in space. Documents that have since been declassified have allowed the public to the specific objectives and proposals of the operation. Among these was a call to take down Soviet satellites by firing projectiles at them or otherwise pushing. The reports even included an elaborate proposal to capture Russian space, bring them in a heat shield material, and dropping them back to a research facility in the U.S. action. The Douglas Aircraft Company, the MOL, with NASA's Gemini B spaceship potentially serving as a vehicle to and from the station. NASA added a circular hatch past the heat shield to enter MOL. The chosen astronauts were only the nature of the proposed mission after selection. Trains, however, and an increased focus on civilian missions related to scientific discovery, and the MOL was never sent to space. The Manned Orbiting Laboratory was canine, 3 years away from its first planned flight. 7 selected for the program were moved to the Space Shuttle program, and all of them eventually. The program was cancelled due to the projected potential for cost-effective uncrewed that could carry out the same tasks that MOL was intended for. and the destruction of foreign satellites remained an American priority. The US side was even proven in 1985 when an F-15 fighter jet let an outdated US satellite in low orbit. This was officially the of spacecraft destruction by a weapon. During the development, the US prioritized keeping the project a secret, but despite their best efforts, this is at least partially what the US was up to, leading to their own exploration of militaries. The Kremlin launched the top-secret Almaz P-60, fearing the military and espionage potential of American spacecraft. Discovery of America's advances with the MOL only served to fuel and push the Tsar to craft its own attack and self-defense space weapons. Engineer for the OKB-52 Rocket Design Bureau, Vladimir Serebriakov, the idea of a military space station, and his lobbying efforts were successful in bringing about, meaning diamond in Russian. The manned outpost was primarily, but it would also be armed. Development took longer than planned, loads and advanced sensors turned out to be more challenging than anticipated. They also temporarily lost interest, as the regular satellites were still churning out value. The project was put on hold when NASA announced the launch of its in 1973, which meant the USSR would miss out on setting the first. The government and space program decided they needed to beat the Americans' small civilian station, partially made with parts of the Soyuz craft, and an Almaz station. This new station, called Salyut, orbited in 1971, attaining a new first for the USSR. Political victory was achieved. The Soviet government greenlit continued work on Almaz work on the military stations as part of the Salyut lineup. While America was able to determine some aspect of the truth and could identify which stations were truly civilic, remained in the dark about the program. The station was comprised of the orbital piloted station, the actual space station module, cargo block to dock and load supplies, and the VA spacecraft, built for cosmonauts, which could be reused for up to 10 trips. The station would have a diameter of 13.6 feet, or 4.15 meters, of 1,680 cubic feet, or 47.5 cubic meters. 3-man crews would be sent out along with the station by Vladimir Serebriakov's Proton F-100. Once the station was in orbit, they would step into the OP through a hatch located in the heat shield, just as the one in the American MOL station. Stays were supposed to last between 1 and 2 months. After they ripped, the station would be recrewed and supplied by a TKS resupply craft. Almaz was fully integrated into the Salyut program in order to keep it as end from hostile governments. Out of 3 Almaz stations placed in orbit successfully crewed, all 3 were launched without their VA spacecraft equipment and the assembly of the Proton rocket. As the TKS resupplied, the 2 stations that were crewed received the cosmonauts from modified Soyuz. In orbit, the space station only saw withdrawals, with only one of the stations reportedly receiving supplies from an unmanned crew. Neither the VA nor the TKS were ever completed. The Soviet Union had placed 7 Salyut space stations in orbit, 3 of which were Almaz program. The USSR didn't just intend a space station for reconnaissance purposes. They also wanted it to be armed with a cannon. The design and construction were given to the KB Teichmass Design Bureau, headed by who had overseen several aviation engineering accomplishments after the Second World War. The cannon was an altered version derived from the Tupolev Tu-22's tailgun cannon 23. The original gas-operated revolver autocannon via supersonic jet was a 23mm weapon that could fire up to 2,600. Tweaks to the weapon by Nudelman's team reduced its caliber to 14 points. Due to the secrecy surrounding the entire endeavor, certain abilities are either speculative or have otherwise not been corroborated. It's alleged that the shot could travel as far as 2 miles, although it's unknown as to its full capabilities in space. Estimates on the rate of them reports. Theoretically, the modified cannon could fire anywhere from 5,000 shots per minute, with a safer estimate possibly approaching the 2,600 original cannon. The projectiles could be shot at a theoretical 800 second, with other reports claiming a slower 690 meters per second, and was tested on Earth, where it was capable of piercing a metal gasoline container. The primary challenge for cosmonauts attempting to take down a satellite, as the weapon was placed on a fixed mounting, and the entire 20-ton stated towards the target. On January 24th, the Almaz station, camouflaged under the name Salyut 3, was scheduled. The crew had departed from the station several months before, in July of 1970. The USSR had yet to practice actually carrying out a cannon shot and were concerned that recoil, or some other aspect of the untested cannon, would affect the station. Yet now, the conditions were prime for a relatively consequence-free test. Just a few hours before the deorbiting, the test was carried out. Jet thrusters were ignited at the same time the cannon fired, so the expected recoil could be. Unofficial reports claimed the cannon shot between 1 and 3 blasts, counting total. The details of the test and the factual results gathered died under Russian leadership. After Salyut 3 was Almaz project winded down and was eventually cancelled. By night, the economy was slowing and on its path to collapse, which would still take around 10 years to. The remaining grounded Almaz stations saw a different destiny unfold than the one. 3 of them were launched as Almaz-T, unmanned heavy radar carrying satellites. Only 2 worked successfully and stayed in orbit. Almaz 205 and 206 were sold to the private company Excalibur Almaz, launched them as newly crewed spacecraft in 2015, but in March of 2016 plans to have its equipment exhibited instead, due to lack of funds. One of these Almaz models is unknown. The truth about the Almaz and the fact that one of their cannons was fired were kept secret by Soviet authorities, and public access to the subject was only given by Russia after the fall of the USSR. Before the program was cancelled, the Soviet Union had planned to move to possibly more dangerous military space station. The OPS carried 2 interceptor missiles for space-to-space warfare instead of a conventional cannon. It was expected to be the 4th military Almaz station. During development, the OPS-4 was modified in terms of design and technology. It needed a bigger, stronger docking port intended for the TKS, which was cancelled in the early stages of development, rather than the lighter port for the Soyuz Almaz stations had. The station would have seen the introduction of a Mech A-SAR with 3 panels and a manned return vehicle that could be reused. Return vehicle and TKS made the Soviets replace the idea of the return vehicle port. The OPS-4 would have carried a Sheet-2 cannon with 2 unguided missiles, but the proposed project was grounded before the 78, and then terminated along with the rest of the Almaz program in 1979. Many of the secret details of this highly classified Soviet program secret.